Alfred Adler, Cognitive Therapy, and the Concept of Self-Esteem. In this video, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the origins of the cognitive therapy tradition, talk a little bit about some of the problematic ways that tradition evolved in the 20th century, and then in a related vein, speak to the concept of self-esteem and the problematic way in which that concept is often understood or maybe misunderstood. Now, cognitive therapy's forefather, we could say, is Alfred Adler. Okay? Adler was an associate of Freud, and like a handful of other associates of Freud who ended up being innovative in their own rights, Adler and Freud ended up breaking from one another when Adler wasn't towing the psychoanalytic line. Adler had a different way of approaching psychological problems. In some ways, it was a more kind of straightforward, practical approach. But there was depth in Adler's ideas, and Adler was considered a depth psychologist. One of Adler's ideas was that a human being, given the nature of human life, has a psychological need for a realistic sense of efficacy. And to the degree that that sense isn't there, there's two ways to deal with the issue. The human can approach the challenges of their life courageously and develop genuine efficacy, or they can try to convince themselves that they're effective despite the reality. Okay? And if the human takes the second path, there's going to be psychological problems. And that's one of the ways, at least, that Adler understood psychological problems. And so Adler's approach to therapy, at least as he promulgated it in his writings, had a lot to do with encouragement. Okay, the encouraging the client, giving the client some courage to really attack their problems head on. Okay, he had various ways that he would go about this, but now I want to talk a little bit about how cognitive therapy tradition evolved, because fast forward to the 1950s, okay, Adler was in the earlier part of the century, but fast forward to the 50s, and there was a guy named Albert Ellis who came along. Ellis is sometimes considered to be the originator of cognitive therapy, but Ellis considered his foremost influence to be Adler, okay? However, Ellis, who developed a form of therapy known as rational emotive therapy, had a style of therapy that had quite a lot to do with haranguing the client into thinking differently, okay? There's video of Ellis doing therapy on the woman named Gloria, and you can see this approach in action.
If I were just a Jane Doe, and if I'd have to accept it, I'd never get what I want, and I don't want to live the rest of my life with just icky men.
Well, it's not necessarily so that you'd never. You really mean your chances would be reduced, because we know some icky girls who get some splendid men, don't we? Yeah, you see, right. So you're generalizing there. You're saying
this haranguing approach to therapy was maybe mirrored in a certain way in what became this kind of popular notion of cognitive therapy, which is that in order to feel better, you just have to change your thoughts. Change your thoughts from what to what? Well, it's from what you've been thinking, which was probably instilled in you by some kind of authorities, to what the new authorities are telling you to think. And I think this has something to do with why we'll see sometimes people trying to get better by telling themselves stuff, right? They've maybe been advised to do this, but they'll tell themselves, I'm wonderful, I'm great, I'm perfectly fine the way I am, right? It's a little like Stuart Smalley in the, I think it was the 90s on Saturday Night Live, look at himself in the mirror and say, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
Because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
See, the comedy of that is, well, what if you're not really good enough? What if you're not able to deal with the challenges of your life? What if people don't like you? What if you're unkind and irresponsible toward others, and so they don't like you very much? They don't want to deal with you. You've not made yourself valuable to others on a social level. What if that's the reality of the situation? No amount of telling yourself that you're wonderful is going to correct your sense of what's really going on, right? It's very much like if someone else treats you irresponsibly and or unkindly, habitually, no amount of telling yourself that they're really a wonderful person is going to get you to not feel bad toward them, okay, and want to get away from them. The thing is, you can't get away from yourself. So the only real solution there when it comes to a kind of faulty self-esteem is to actually get better at life, okay, which is kind of, takes some effort. Now, I should probably add that this approach, if taken in isolation, could be kind of like shaming. It could kind of convey the idea that all of your problems are your fault, and that if you're suffering, it must mean you're just not trying hard enough. I don't know how much Adler was that way, but we should remember that in the early part of the 20th century, there wasn't a great understanding of how trauma works. Also, all of the practitioners were kind of working through their own limited lens. So Adler was seeing things through a rational lens, and Freud was seeing things through a more kind of sexual lens, and Jung was seeing things through a spiritual lens, and so on and so forth. There wasn't a very integrated perspective on psychology. There still isn't a very integrated perspective on psychology, but maybe things are evolving. And there certainly wasn't much work done with respect to trauma. This concept wasn't absent, but it wasn't something that was focused on or well understood. So certainly don't take me to be suggesting that that if you're suffering, this is all your fault and you just need to try harder. That's not what this is about. But this is an angle on psychological issues that I think is often not really addressed. And so part of the reason I make this video is to fill in that gap. Okay, I hope you find this video valuable, and I'll be back with more soon.